Some betrayals burn slow, like a fuse you don't see until it's too late. Others hit like a lightning bolt, splitting your world in two. For me, it was both slow and sudden. A poison seeping into my life drop by drop until the truth exploded in a single, shattering moment. My name is Sarah, and at 32, I never thought I'd be staring into a steaming cup of coffee, wondering if the man I loved was trying to kill me. But here I am, telling you a story that starts with a sip and ends with a reckoning. It was a crisp Sunday morning in Charlotte, the kind where the air smells like fall and family feels like the warmest place to be. I sat at my brother-in-law David's polished oak dining table, surrounded by the chatter of our monthly family brunch. The spread was a work of art: fluffy pancakes, crisp bacon, fresh fruit arranged like a still life, but my eyes were locked on the coffee cup in front of me, steam curling up like a warning. My husband, Michael, slid it toward me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Made this just for you, babe," he said, his voice smooth but laced with something I couldn't name. The coffee smelled wrong, not like the rich, earthy aroma I loved, but sharp, almost chemical, like cleaning fluid mixed with something bitter. My stomach twisted, not from hunger, but from a gut-deep instinct I'd learned to trust. 3 years into our marriage, I'd had too many accidents: stomach cramps after dinners, dizziness after drinks, hospital visits that left doctors scratching their heads. Each time, Michael was there, all concern and apologies. But the pattern was impossible to ignore. And David, with his sly grins and pointed comments, always seemed to be nearby, stirring the pot sometimes literally. "Looks delicious," I said, forcing a smile as I lifted the cup but didn't drink. Across the table, David watched me, his spoon clinking softly against his own untouched coffee. "Michael's been experimenting with new blends," he said, his tone light, but his eyes sharp. "Says this one's special, just for you." The way he lingered on those last 3 words sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced at Michael, who was busy slicing a pancake, but his hands trembled slightly, betraying the calm he was trying to project. I'd been here before, in this exact moment of doubt. Last month, I'd spent a night in there after sipping tea at David's house, my vision blurring and my heart racing. The doctors called it an unexplained reaction, and David swore he'd brewed the tea the same way he always did. But I'd seen the glance he'd shared with Michael when I staggered to the bathroom, the kind of look that says more than words ever could. And then there were the late-night texts I glimpsed on Michael's phone, cryptic messages from David about taking care of things and making sure she's out of the picture. I'd brushed it off as paranoia until now. The coffee sat heavy in my hands, the ceramic warm against my palms. I needed to know. I needed proof. "Oh, shoot," I said, glancing at my phone. "I've got a work call I forgot about." "David, mind if I use your office for a sec?" He waved a hand, his smile tight. "Just don't mess up my files," he said, edge to his voice. I stood, and as I passed his place setting, I faked a stumble, my elbow knocking into his coffee cup. In the chaos of apologies and napkins, I swapped our cups, quick and smooth, like a magician pulling a trick. "Sorry, I'm such a klutz," I muttered, hurrying toward the office. My heart pounded as I positioned myself just inside the doorway, where I could still see the dining room. Michael was scrolling his phone, his jaw tight. David picked up the cup, my cup. Now his hand took a slow sip. My breath caught. Part of me wanted to scream, to stop him. But I needed the truth. I'd spent too many nights clutching a hospital bed rail, too many mornings wondering if I was losing my mind. This was my chance to know. David took another sip, then set the cup down, his brow furrowing. "Michael," he said, his voice unsteady, "this coffee tastes off." Michael's head snapped up, his eyes darting to the cup. "What do you mean?" he asked. But there was a tremor in his tone, a crack in his facade. David's hand shook as he reached for his napkin, his face paling. I feel weird," he said, gripping the table. He tried to stand but swayed, his chair scraping against the floor. Michael leapt up, knocking over his glass of orange juice. "David, what's wrong?" he shouted. But his eyes flicked to the cup, and I saw it, the dawning horror of realization. "That wasn't your coffee," he whispered, the words slipping out before he could stop them. David's gaze locked onto him, wide with shock. "What did you put in it?" he gasped, his voice rising. "Michael, what the hell did you do?" I stepped out of the office, my phone already recording, its tiny red light a steady pulse in my hand. "I switched the cups," I said, my voice calm despite the storm raging inside me. David's eyes snapped to mine, his face a mix of fear and fury. "Sarah, you..." He doubled over, clutching his stomach, and slid to the floor, his breaths coming in sharp gasps. Michael stood frozen, his hands raised as if he could ward off the truth. 911, "What's your emergency?" The operator's voice was crisp through my phone speaker. "I need an ambulance at 237 Oakwood Lane," I said, keeping my eyes on Michael. "My brother-in-law is having a severe reaction to something in his coffee. He's conscious but shaking badly." David's tremors were worsening, his hands clawing at the tablecloth. Michael knelt beside him, his face ashen. "It wasn't supposed to be you," he muttered, barely audible. But my phone caught every word. "Sarah, you knew," David rasped, his voice weak but venomous. "You set me up." I didn't flinch. "I've been sick too many times, David. Every time I eat or drink here, I end up in the hospital. I needed to know if I was crazy or if you two were poisoning me." His eyes widened, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he turned to Michael, his voice a snarl. "You idiot. You said it was safe." Just enough to make her miss the pitch next week. My blood ran cold. The pitch, the biggest presentation of my career, for a multi-million-dollar client account at the marketing firm where David and I both worked. I'd been outperforming him for months, landing clients he'd chased for years. He'd never hidden his resentment, but I hadn't realized it ran this deep. "The pitch," I said, stepping closer. "This was about work. You tried to poison me over a client?" David's face twisted, pain and anger warring for control. "You were stealing everything," he spat, his words slurring. "I built that firm's reputation. Then you waltz in, and suddenly every client wants Sarah. The Carson account was mine until you swooped in with your perfect little proposals." Michael said we just needed to slow you down. Michael's head dropped, his hands trembling. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he whispered, "just enough to make you sick for a few days." David said it'd give him a shot at the account. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. I kept my phone steady, recording every damning word. And the other times I pressed the T last month, the dinner in July when I could barely stand. Those weren't accidents, were they? David's silence was answer enough. The paramedics burst through the door, their boots heavy on the hardwood. I stepped back, letting them swarm David, who was now barely conscious, his breath shallow. "We've got a possible poisoning," I told them, my voice steady. "He drank coffee meant for me. You'll want to test it." One of the paramedics nodded, already barking orders to his team. As they loaded David onto a stretcher, I turned to Michael, who looked like a man watching his world collapse. "I'm going with him to the hospital," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "And Michael, the doctors are going to want to know exactly what was in that coffee." His eyes met mine, filled with a terror I'd never seen before. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The emergency room at Charlotte Medical Center was a blur of white coats and beeping machines. I sat in the waiting area, my phone clutched in my hand, the recording save hand backed up to my cloud. David was in critical condition, the doctors said, with toxins in his system they couldn't yet identify. Michael had vanished, mumbled something about needing air and hadn't come back. I wasn't surprised. He'd always been good at running from consequences. "Family of David Carter," a nurse called out. I stood, following her to a small consultation room where Dr. Elena Martinez waited, her expression grim. "Mrs. Lawson, "We found something unusual in your brother-in-law's blood work," she said, tapping her tablet. "A synthetic compound, typically used in controlled medical trials. It's not something you'd find in a grocery store coffee blend. Can you tell me what happened?" I took a deep breath and played the recording, watching Dr. Martinez's face shift from concern to outrage. "This is deliberate," she said, her voice tight. "The levels we found could have been lethal if untreated. We need to involve the police." I nodded, already pulling up the texts I'd forwarded from Michael's phone messages I'd found weeks ago when I'd started to suspect something was wrong. "These might help," I said, showing her the exchange between Michael and David about dosing her just right before the Carson pitch. The doctor's eyes narrowed. "You've been sick before, haven't you?" she asked. I nodded, listing the incidents: February's dinner, April's tea, July's breakfast. Each time, I was told it was food poisoning or a virus, I said. But the symptoms were always just off. "I'd like you to compare my medical records to what you found in David today." Dr. Martinez agreed, and within hours, the police were involved. Detective Laura Hayes, a no-nonsense investigator with a knack for unraveling lies, took my statement and listened to the recording. "You've been meticulous," she said, flipping through the notes I kept for months. "States, symptoms, suspicions. Most people don't think to document like this." "I had to," I said. "They were my family. I didn't want to believe it. But I couldn't ignore it anymore." I showed her the backup phone I'd started carrying, filled with covert recordings of Michael and David's hushed conversations. One clip stood out. David's voice, low and urgent, saying, "The Carson account is worth millions. Michael, we can't let her take it. One more dose, and she's out." Michael's reply was chilling. "I've got something stronger this time. She won't even make it to the meeting." Detective Hayes' jaw tightened. "We've got enough for arrests," she said. "We're searching their homes and offices now, and we've got Michael in custody. He tried to leave town, but didn't get far." She paused, studying me. "You're holding up better than most would." "I'm not sure I'm holding up at all," I admitted, my voice cracking for the first time. "I loved him. I trusted them both. How do you move on from something like this?" The hospital toxicology report came back the next day, confirming the presence of a rare compound in David's system and traces of it in my medical records from past hospitalizations. The police found vials of the substance in Michael's home office, hidden in a locked drawer, along with notes detailing dosages and their effects on me. It was like reading a scientist's log of a twisted experiment, each entry a stab to the heart. David survived, but barely. From his hospital bed, he tried to spin a story, claiming it was all Michael's idea, that he'd only gone along to protect me from my own ambition. But the evidence was ironclad: the texts, the recordings, the vials. Michael, meanwhile, crumbled under questioning, admitting they'd been tampering with my food and drinks for months. Always careful to keep the doses non-lethal, but enough to derail my career. It was about the money, he sobbed during his interrogation. According to Detective Hayes, David said if you kept landing clients, he'd lose his edge at the firm. He promised me a cut if I helped. The betrayal cut deeper than the poison. Michael wasn't just my husband. He was my partner, my confidant. Or so I'd thought. The trial was a spectacle, dominating local headlines for weeks. I sat in the courtroom, watching as the prosecution laid out the case, the meticulous planning, the escalating doses, the sheer audacity of their scheme. David's polished charm faded, his face haggard as witnesses detailed his jealousy-fueled vendetta. Michael couldn't meet my eyes. His shoulders slumped under the weight of his guilt. Dr. Martinez's testimony was the turning point. She presented charts showing how the toxins had built up in my system over time, each incident a calculated step towards something far worse. If Mrs. Lawson had consumed the coffee intended for her that day, she said, her voice steady, she likely would not be here today. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Guilty on all counts, attempted murder, conspiracy, and a slew of lesser charges. As the judge handed down the maximum sentence, I felt no triumph, only a hollow relief. David and Michael were led away, their futures reduced to prison cells and ruined reputations. I walked out of the courthouse into a world that felt both foreign and familiar, like waking from a nightmare you can't quite shake. A year later, I stood on a stage at the Charlotte Business Summit, addressing a packed auditorium. The Carson account had catapulted my career, leading to a string of high-profile clients and a reputation as one of the city's top marketing strategists. Success isn't just about winning. I told the crowd, my voice steady, it's about resilience, about standing up when the people you trust most try to tear you down. It's about trusting your instincts, even when they tell you something you don't want to hear. After the speech, a young woman approached me, her eyes bright with ambition. How did you keep going? She asked. After everything they did to you, I thought of that coffee cup, the metallic smell, the moment I chose to fight instead of fold. I focused on the truth. I said, I gathered proof, stayed calm, and refused to let their poison define me. That night, I got an email from the Carson client, renewing our contract for another 3 years. I smiled, thinking of David and Michael. Their names now synonymous with scandal in the industry they tried to roll. The local paper mentioned their sentencing in a brief article, but I didn't read it. Instead, I opened my laptop and started drafting a new campaign, pouring my energy into building something they could never touch. Betrayal leaves scars, but it also teaches you who you are. I'm Sarah, and I'm still here stronger, wiser, and unafraid. So, what's in your cup? And who's pouring it? Stick around, because sometimes the truth is the bitterest brew of all.